I thought it might help to give you just a little brief history of AutoCarto. Some of you, like Nick Chrisman and others, have probably been to the great majority of them. But let me just tell the rest of you a little bit about this conference. It started in 1974, which was about 15 years after the advent of automated cartography. And it was dubbed the International Cartography Conference on Automation and Cartography. And it brought together people who were working in that area from government, academia, and research and private industry. Surprisingly to some, the symposium series was laid to rest in '97 because, as one of the previous conference chairs told me, they had believed they solved the problem of automating cartography. By that time, about 13 symposia had been held, but other things were also happening. And maybe this helped to justify shutting down the conference. By then, AM/FM, Automated Mapping and Facilities Management, began in 1978, and it became GIS/LIS, Land Information Systems, in the mid-1990s. And then also GI Science emerged in 2000. That was a conference that was put on by the National Center for Geographic Information and Analysis, NCGIA. And that was put on 12 years after NCGIA received its first multi-million grant in 1988. Also in 1997, the Esri User Conference was relocated to San Diego to accommodate the growing number of attendees, which had climbed to about 6,000. So all that was happening. And in the meantime, CAGIS was the second largest member of an umbrella organization to which it belonged called the American Congress on Surveying and Mapping. And by the in the early 2000s, the cartographers in the organization started feeling a little bit marginalized, actually a little bit more than marginalized by the growing contingent of surveyors in that organization. So they were getting a little outnumbered and their voices weren't being heard as much as they wanted to be heard. So consequently, in 2005, when I became president of CAGIS, we decided to secede from ACSM and we became an independent organization. And at that time, we resurrected the AutoCarto conference in recognition that cartography and GI science continue to evolve and that researchers are continually presented with new challenges. Now, the name is outdated, we know. The CAGIS board is working on that, but it does have a legacy that the name is associated with. So when you hear about CAGIS's conferences in the future, listen for the conference information and equate it to the AutoCarto history. Okay, so then, as of 2018, so that was before pandemic, another 8 conferences had been held, and they continued to bring together researchers from across the world, primarily in those 3 arenas, government, academia, and the private sector. And they were working in GI science and cartography, and often at the crossroads of the two. Then, prompted by the global pandemic, AutoCarto 2020 was held completely online, which brings us to AutoCarto 2022. And AutoCarto 2022, as you know, is being held here in the beautiful Southern California location of Esri's main campus. So we have a very timely theme, which is ethics and mapping. And we're talking about integrity, inclusion, and empathy. You'll see three keynote speakers, 9 panelists, 52 presentations in 12 sessions, 142 authors, and yesterday we had 6 workshops. So a quick review of the past AutoCarto conferences reveals how important these were. At its inception, AutoCarto was the only event to bring together people working in automated cartography, and coincidentally, the early development of GIS. And evidently, there were a lot of people working in these arenas who did want to meet with others, hear about their other people's work, and share their own. For example, the fourth AutoCarto conference in 1979 had a record of 870 participants, and nearly all the giants, people who would come to be giants in GIS, were in attendance, including Jack Dangerman. Now compare this to the first Esri User Conference, which was held 2 years later in 1981 with 16 users. I think I got that right, didn't I, Clint?
That's an overestimate.
Okay, Clint thinks maybe there were 11 users in attendance. But anyway, we'll move on. CAGIS has also undertaken the archiving of all AutoCarto proceedings. They are in the AutoCarto archives on the CAGIS website. It's a treasure trove of early work in GIS. So people who are working in research may want to access that. So that brings us to this year's event.